Yo, the Foul-Hooked Whitey is back. This is episode 2, Foul-Hooked Whitey's 2024 Top 10 Annoying Aspects of Running a Fly Shop. I left off with the number 3 on our top 10 list, which was overbearing sales reps. And I'm sensitive about that because I love sales reps. Sales reps I don't get to see very much. They bring me the new shit. I get to look at it. I don't have to go somewhere to look at it. I don't have to go to one of these ridiculous shows to view all the new stuff. They come to me. It's a service. But it's still a sales pitch. And it's still an add-on. And it's still sometimes, I got to sell this shit. So I'm not necessarily looking at the landscape of this shop, really determining if this is a good fit. So I left off with that. And number 4 on this list is holier-than-thou vendors. Holier-than-thou vendors. And that's a very, very, very limited scope of vendor out there. Vendor meaning, obviously, somebody I wholesale and buy goods for them, and I turn around and I sell them to you. And this vendor is a prominent vendor. They seem to have diminished a little bit in the sport of fly fishing over the last 5 to 7 years, but they're still in it. And I'm talking about Patagonia. And I've had a rub with Patagonia for a while, and it isn't necessarily just because of what I'm going to talk about here, but anybody that knows me knows I'm not a big fan of the company Patagonia. And in this particular aspect of my disdain for this superb company, and they are a superb company, the reason that they got number 4 is they're totally holier than thou environmentally. And I'm a greenie. I mean, I'm somebody that is going to vote for habitat over development 95% of the time. But I'm somebody that's pro-energy. I really am. I put fucking gas in my truck every other day. And so to just rail on the petroleum industry or rail on the coal industry or rail on the energy industry at large is like, I don't fucking get it. I've been waiting for this motherfucking, hydrogen engine to show up that everybody's been talking about that's going to replace oil. But I don't think there is a hydrogen engine out there. So the reason I've got a rub with the gooch, Patagonia, when it comes to being holier than thou is that they're definitely a company that has made it clear that they're anti-oil, anti-petroleum, anti-gas, anti-coal, and almost to a degree anti-everything that involves harvesting natural resources or minerals. And I get where they're coming from because usually, and in a lot of cases, harvesting minerals fucks up the environment. It's taking a big excavator and digging a fucking hole someplace there's never been a hole dug. But the hypocrisy is that if you look at 90% of everything that fucking Patagonia makes as far as apparel, maybe not 90, but God, high percentage nonetheless. All their clothes are made out of fucking oil byproducts, man. I mean, it's all synthetic. And, if it's not fucking cotton, it's probably got some fucking oil in it. And yeah, I'm talking about fabric. Joe Schmo out there may not listen to it. I got 75 listeners. I mean, that half to most might not know that a fucking nano puff shell is made out of fucking oil. So, the holier than thou bit that they put out about no mining and no exploratory oil drilling and all this is really just bullshit. And so they get on the Foul-Hooked Whitey's nerves big time when they fucking take this on. So that's number 4. Number 5, the Foul-Hooked Whitey's 2024 Top 10 Annoying Aspects of Running a Fly Shop. Bug thieves. That's right, I said it. Bug thieves. You're probably sitting out there fucking going, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Let me tell you what a bug thief is. A bug thief is usually a mid-level or lower-level bug vendor. A lot of consumers don't know this. But a copper john is a proprietary nymph. And by proprietary, I mean the design and the name is actually owned by a fly company. Now, let's be real. Every single catalog on the planet sells copper johns. But the companies out there that don't hold the right to the original copper john, who fucking owns the right to call in a copper john? Umpqua. And that's because Umpqua has a professional relationship with a designer by the name of John Barr. John Barr created the copper john, designed it, fished it, and put it into the marketplace. Umpqua has John Barr under contract. Therefore, they can use that proprietary fly, the copper john, freely and call it a copper john. Anybody else out there besides Umpqua that is selling a copper john is fudging. I mean, we all know it's the same fucking bug. I don't think you can copyright that down to the epoxy that's used on the back of a copper john. But they really shouldn't call it a copper john because they don't own the right to fucking call it a copper john. And the bug thief aspect of this was all rooted in a local dude from here in Billings that I think he's back in business or is back in business or going to be back in business. This motherfucker was known as just an outright bug thief. You know, I mean, I heard from some reliable sources and this person that had this company, and I don't want to get into too much about him. But what I'll say is this cat has a catalog. And this dude's so fucking stupid, and I don't mind calling him stupid. He knows who he is, and I know who he is. He's so fucking stupid that he's actually calling the flies in his catalog by their proprietary name. That means he's selling sex dungeons. One problem? He's not selling sex dungeons. He's selling a knockoff of a sex dungeon that he's going to take the name that someone like Kelly Gallup coined to name this fly Kelly developed. And this fucker, who the bug thief, is basically taking a knockoff bug, probably tied in a B or a C grade factory, calling it a fucking sex dungeon, selling it to shops, selling it out of his little store, and basically fucking ripping everybody off. Because there's no fucking way that bug, the sex dungeon, is tied as well as the proprietary owner of the sex dungeon, which is Montana Fly Company. So there's something to be said about buying authentic when it comes to fly patterns. You don't want to go buy a pair of fucking knockoff Nikes somewhere, right? You want to buy a real pair of Nikes. And in our sport, there's real sex dungeons and there's knockoff sex dungeons. And these bug thieves are so sketchy, they've got fucking no credibility that they're going to call them something else. You know, I mentioned Copper Johns at the start of this segment, or this part of my list, and the company that I buy my Copper Johns from calls that same fly a Copper Bob. And the reason they call it a Copper Bob is because they're respectful of the fact that Umpqua owns the right, the name, to call that fly a Copper John. Bug thieves, they don't fucking care. They just don't fucking care. And they're sketchy. So number 5, the foul-hooked Whitey's top 10 annoying aspects of running a fly shop: bad guides. And I've said this hundreds of times, dozens of times since I started doing this podcast, that I respect guides more than anybody in the entire industry of fly fishing. And the reason that I respect those guides is because they have the hardest fucking job standalone than anybody in the entire fucking industry. They've got the toughest gig. And why do they have the toughest gig? Because they have to make people happy to fly fish. Right? Imagine that. Imagine going out with somebody you just met, not knowing anything about what makes that client tick, and then taking on the responsibility for a $700 bill, a $650 day rate. Imagine taking on that responsibility of making that client happy about catching trout or catching saltwater fish. That is a fucking tall order. That's a bigger order than me having to make sure that a bunch of stuff's on pegs in my shop, and that's hard work. So out of all the guides who work their asses off, there's a small percentage of them that are not good or not respectful or not congenial or not nothing. Excuse me. Bad guides are as common as bad cops. There's not a bunch of them. But the bad ones in the sport of guiding can make it tough for the good guides because it can really, really sully a customer's opinion about guiding. I've been on lots of guided trips, even as a FlyShop owner, and I've come across a handful of bad guides. I remember one that I actually fished with locally here, and this is a long time ago. And this guy's got the initials PP, and I'm going to drop the dude's initials because I want some of the guides that are out there locally here to possibly know who I'm talking about. And this guy he's just fucking full of himself. That's the biggest thing. This guy wasn't born with a set of ears. He was born with an extra big fucking mouth. And I treated my dad 2 straight days with this guy here locally. And my dad made a comment about just something like deforestation, meaning not thinning forests. It was just a casual comment about habitat. And this guy just basically proceeded to tell my dad on a paid day how fucking wrong he was. And I don't know if it gets any fucking dumber than that. I mean, I don't think you need to be a yes man. But he could have just not said anything. But instead, he challenged my dad's assertion as far as, the practice of, thinning out forests to avoid forest fires or the beetle thing or blah, 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 blah. Who gives a fuck? But it was just such a bad play because my dad's an easy cat to get along with and he loves to fish. So we get off the water that day and I didn't really notice anything about it. And my dad, we get into the car after saying goodbye to this guide. And my fucking dad says, hey, you can go with that guy again tomorrow because we had 2 days scheduled, but I'm not going with him tomorrow. He's an asshole. So I'm a little shocked that my dad doesn't want to fish and we've already prepaid this trip and blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, I won't go either. He's like, no, you go. You like him. You get along with him. And at the time, that was true. So we get off the water that day and I end up calling this gentleman and his gal picks up. And his gal is somebody who coordinates the trips, right? So she's involved in booking trips for her guy. And I kind of go into this softly with her and I'm like, hey, my dad doesn't want to go tomorrow. And she's like, what, why? I'm like, well, she didn't really like how blah, blah, blah really interacted with us. And this woman basically said, well, I'm not surprised about that. So his gal knows he can be an asshole. And we paid at the time the top rate for that guide today. And that guide with my dad just did that classic, just made a bonehead discussion out of nothing. And that's because he's opinionated and that's because he's authentic as far as being passive-aggressive rude. And that's kind of what you get with some guides. I understand a surly guide at the middle to the end of September. But at this time, this guy should have just been like, oh, yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir. I understand your opinion. Yep. Oh, right over there, guys. Right on that seam left. Drop your hopper there. But instead, he had to make it personal, had to piss a client off. And for that day, this dude was a bad guide. Going to extend this real fast. when it comes to bad guides. My favorite place to fish in Mexico is the Punta Allen Fishing Club. I fucking love it. The first time I ever fished there, the top permit guide, Juanito, was so fucking hard on me. I felt like a 7th grade weakling trying out for fucking football. Right? I mean, I wasn't going to help the team. I wasn't going to do anything good. I didn't have the physicality or the speed. And this dude fucking called out every fucking aspect of that to me this day. So finally, at about 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, this guy keeps on me. And I was just like, motherfucker, I'm not going to cast one more fucking time for you. I have had it with your belittling. I've had it with your fucking attitude. I've had it with you bossing me the fuck around. I'm up here doing my best to fish and enjoy myself. I come down here one fucking week a year, and this cocksucker expects me to be fucking Andy fucking Mills out there. And so that ended our day. And in terms of me having any contact or fishing with this guide again that year, I didn't do it. I didn't want to. Fuck him. The next year, I come back, and I asked the outfitter, I want to fish with this guide, excuse me. And I was able to. And since that day, this guy does nothing but work his ass off for me and be respectful to me. And all I did was punch the bully in the nose. And that's sometimes what you have to do with a bad guide, a guide with attitude. You tell him to fuck off. You tell him your money's good. And you tell the dude to act professional. And that's how you fucking cope with a bad guide. So that's it. Episode 2, Foul Hooked Whitey's top 10 annoying aspects of running a fly shop. We'll be back with episode 3 here shortly. Thank you very much for listening. Out.